L'shana tova u'metuka. A good and a sweet new year. Also, good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom. It is hard to believe it's the beginning of a new year. What does that even mean? Tonight, Shabbat, there's a new moon in the sky. It's like the faintest sliver of light up there in the dark. And that's always how it is at the beginning of a new Hebrew month. It's always how it is at the beginning of a new Hebrew year. And this year, I feel like the symbolism, is just God speaking to us through the Jewish calendar saying, I know it's dark out there. I know. And I promise you it will get better. I promise you the light will grow. I know the feeling of interminable darkness is one that many of us have felt over the past few months. Last March, people with April and May and June b'nai mitzvahs and weddings scrambled to reschedule them. And many of you rescheduled them for this fall, for right now, because we had no idea what to expect. And we thought we could place a kind of naive and totally unfounded hope in the passage of a few months, that would be a reasonable amount of time for things to get back to normal. But nothing is normal. And the truth is, things haven't been normal for a lot of people for a long time. And that has nothing to do with the pandemic. The pandemic exposed a lot of what already wasn't working. And so many of us now feel called in this new reality to do more for the world, for our democracy, for Chicago, for our neighbors. Maimonides tells us that the sound of the shofar is designed to say to us, wake up, wake up, wake up, you sleepers. Literally, it says that in the text. Wake up, you sleepers. Examine your lives. Return to your purpose. Wake up. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur every year are always meant to be a kind of wake-up call to the soul. And waking up this year feels all too real. Like, okay, God, I'm awake. How much more awake can I actually be? And honestly, now that I'm awake, what should I do? Which brings us to this moment, to this moment, Erev Rosh Hashanah. In the face of the enormity of the work that there is to be done, you may feel it to be woefully inadequate, a luxury, a privilege to gather, albeit in front of computer screens, to pray, to sing, to take these days out of the grind and the flow of the week for reflection and renewal and reconnection. But I want to tell you something. This is not the first time that Jews have celebrated the new year in turmoil. It makes the official greeting of the high holidays, L'shana tova u'metuka, may you have a good and a sweet new year. It makes them feel less like a perfunctory salutation and more like a prayer. And the truth is, we need each other now more than we ever have. We need each other's faces and voices and support and love. And I've been seeing it fill Zoom rooms since March, for morning minions, for Shiva, for baby namings and weddings and meditation classes. We need to know that we have people to march and to protest with. And it has been inspiring to see so many Mishkanites banding together to put on masks and go out into the streets and affirm that Black lives matter. We have to know that there are people who we are praying for and who are praying for us, because our lives haven't stopped since the pandemic. We're still dating and falling in love and having babies and losing family members and parenting and dealing with aging parents and dealing with our own health concerns. We need each other. We need to take care of each other. We need to be cared for by one another. We need people in the safety of community to help us grow and become better versions of ourselves, to tell us kindly when we've said something wrong and to shepherd us with love through those moments that can be sometimes uncomfortable where we're learning. This is not the first time Jews and Jewish communities have entered a new year in the midst of darkness, and it won't be the last. So, like a pilot who doesn't know which way is up, or like a scuba diver who doesn't know which way is down, in this moment of profound spiritual disorientation, we rely on our time-tested instruments to lead us, on the traditions, the words, the prayers, the stories, the inspiration, the community that has carried our people thus far. John Lewis, the legendary civil rights leader and congressman who just died 2 months ago, in the essay published in the New York Times on the day of his funeral, he wrote, "You must study and learn the lessons of history, because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes and through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out so long ago can help you find the solutions to the challenges of our time. This is not the first time that we have entered a new year in the midst of darkness, and it won't be the last. And yet, we were built for this. You, too, were built for this. My prayer for you in this year to come is that you get in touch with your sense of sacred purpose as an individual, and that we as a community reconnect with our highest aspirations for what we together can do, and that we carry out of this moment the inspiration to fuel us in the evolution and yes, maybe the revolution that we are all praying for, ushering in a time of greater justice and greater light and greater peace and greater joy for all of us and for all people. Shana Tova Umetuka, a good and a sweet and a healthy new year. Let's light these Shabbat candles. First, light our candle for Yom Tov, for a holiday. This is a special blessing that we get to say only tonight because it's both Rosh Hashanah and Shabbat. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat v'shel Yom HaZikaron. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. Amen. We rise for the Baruch Hu. Hi, join us. את אדוני המבורך, ברוך אדוני המבורך.
can take a seat and you can daven in English or in Hebrew as is comfortable for you as we meditate on the changing seasons and the changing light in every single day. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidbaro ma'arivavim b'chokmah
You open the gates of heaven at the right times. You have established all the cycles wisely, days and nights, seasons and constellations, all progressing through the heavens.
Uma'avir yom u'mevi laila umavdil ben yom uven laila Adonai tzavaot shemo el chai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed Hay 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 Yisrael amcha ahavta Torah u'mitzvot chukim u'mishpatim otanu limadata Al kein Adonai Eloheinu b'shachbeinu v'komeinu nasiach b'chukecha v'nismach b'divrei tiratecha u'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed Ki hem chayenu le'orech yameinu u'vehem negei yomam v'alayla ואהבתך תסיר ממנו לעולמים היי 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 ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו
One of the biggest things that people have told me they miss about Mishkan is singing in a room with other people. The harmonies, the closeness, the energy that happens when you get to the climax of some great tune and there's stamping and there's clapping and there's eyes closed. I imagine this sense of missing that is especially palpable right now, because at the high holidays, it's not a few hundred people in the room, it's a few thousand people all joining voices. For me, those moments of prayer and song are like the embodiment of God. You know, call it God, don't call it God. I call it God. You know, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. God is one, it is oneness. It's a feeling, it's a connectedness, you know, and all of the separate vocal cords of all of the people in the room aspirating all of their particles, which we never thought about until very recently, intermingling to create a kind of connectedness that, you know, when you're feeling open to it, can actually strike the chord of the oneness of the universe, which is a beautiful metaphor for the discord and the messiness of the world that somehow beneath the surface radiates God's presence in every moment through that song, through that one song, uni-verse, that we're all sort of mysteriously built into and a part of. And it is one of the many challenges of practicing a living spiritual tradition meant to be practiced in a minyan in front of a computer screen. We were actually hoping to be at the Auditorium Theater this year for High Holidays. And yet here we all are in our living rooms or bedrooms or back porches, maybe wearing your bathrobe at home. In order to keep this sense of connectivity alive with so many of you on your life journeys over the course of this past year, we have asked many of you, hundreds of you, in fact, to participate in our services, to lead parts of services over the course of the holidays. I've asked some of my friends from across the country who have composed some of the music that we'll be singing to share a little bit of their wisdom with you. You'll see the faces of people you know and recognize. You will see the faces of people you don't know. You may see the faces of people you work with and had no idea were Mishkan people or were Jewish. You'll see people from Chicago and people from around the country. There are a lot of faces that you won't see because of the medium. And that is, for me, more of an incentive to participate in the chat so that the more people will know who you are and where you are, and the more connection you'll have with other people in some way here. For some of you, this is your first Rosh Hashanah. For some of you, this is your first Rosh Hashanah as a Jew. For all of us, this is going to be the first Shema, the first God is one moment of the new year. So let's just all take a moment to get centered and to open ourselves up for connection and appreciation of all of the people who are part of this moment with us. Who or what has conspired across time and space to make it possible for you to be here right now? Who or what across time and space has made it possible for you to be here right now with us celebrating the Jewish New Year? Think about it. Hundreds of people, thousands of people. Parents, grandparents, teachers, friends, lovers, ex-lovers, children, the developers of the internet. All of us, part of this greater oneness, connecting all of us. We're going to take one breath for each word of the Shema. It is a custom that many have to actually close your eyes and cover your eyes up with one of God's names, Shaddai, for each word of the Shema, and with our eyes closed, connecting to that greater oneness.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha v'chol yadecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavcha hayom al levavecha v'sheyamtam levavecha v'dibartam v'shitacha b'techa v'lechatecha b'derech v'shokbecha gumecha v'shtam le'olot al yadecha v'hayu totafot bein einecha v'tatam al mezuzot beitecha u'v'yisharecha.
Shana Tova Mishkan. I'm Rabbi Shir Yaakov Fait. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of your high holiday services, and I'm so touched you sing this song, the Rishikesh Milchamocha, this melody that I learned from Rabbi Zach Fredman, which he brought back from Rishikesh, India, in northern India, known as the kind of capital of yoga. He said he heard this melody on the street, and when he brought it to me, I thought it was such a perfect, simple, sweet melody to turn into a call and response. And when we set it to this part of the prayer which asks for redemption, it's really saying that we all need help. Each and every one of us needs to be supported by community, the forces of the divine, by each other, by our needs. And so this is such a sweet way to just sing these 5 notes. This is a major pentatonic scale. It's just so simple that we can try to get to the heart of what it is that we're praying for, of what we need. And then we sing that out, and we also receive a response. So there's a time for asking, and there's a time for listening, to remind us that Geulah, redemption, is something that never happens alone. And this prayer then leads into Hashkivenu, which is the prayer for Shalom, for wholeness, for integration, for peacefulness, for a place for all the parts to come together. So as you sing this song for yourselves, for your community, for the whole world, may it be one of redemption and freedom, wholeness and peace.
Ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha, nedar bakodesh, nora tehilot, oh sefer, nora tehilot, oh sefer.
Eloheinu l'shalom v'ha'amideinu shomreinu l'chaim ufros aleinu sukat shalomecha ufros aleinu sukat shalomecha Hashkiveinu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom v'ha'amideinu shomreinu l'chaim.
Almost 5 years ago, in my first year of rabbinical school, we were given an assignment for a class. We were supposed to have a conversation with God, record the conversation, and analyze it, a verbatim with God. Now, I had spent that first 26 years of my life doing a lot of talking to God. I had grown up praying out of a siddur. I felt comfortable with those words. I had talked to God about things that were happening in my life, illness that was happening in my family, injustice that I was seeing in the world. My conversations with God usually took one of two tones. It was either the aforementioned, complaints, injustices, anger, or it was a lot of gratitude, a lot of wow over really amazing things that I saw, very often outside in nature while hiking. So when I got this assignment to do this verbatim with God, I kind of felt like, yeah, I got this. Like, I know how to talk to God. Nothing really crazy is going to happen now. So I sat down, talked to God, and the conversation went like many of my previous conversations with God. Hey, God, it's me. Just wanted to talk to you about some things that are still on my mind. It's pretty unfair that all these people I know have been really sick. And speaking of unfair, you still really haven't addressed a lot of these injustices and inequities that I saw in the developing world that, it seems like disease is really rampant. People don't have access to healthcare or clean water. A lot of children are dying and people are really living in really challenging conditions. And, God, I think it's your job to do something about that. And, why haven't you done something about that until now? God, you're really failing. You need to do something. The conversation started to spiral as I continued to get angry. And then there came a moment where I paused. And I heard something back. I wasn't even really trying to listen. I just was really taking my next breath. And God had a response for me. I was totally floored. 26 years of talking to God. And it had never occurred to me that God might actually have something to say back to me. Wasn't much. It was just, yeah, that stuff does suck. Do you want to actually have a conversation about it, or you want to just yell at me? And I realized in all that time that I thought I had been praying, all that time that I had spent with a siddur, with my eyes closed, pouring out the words that were on my heart, I'd actually never listened for what God had to say to me. I'd never been in conversation with God. So I want to invite you, as we move into the Amidah, to try out saying a little bit less and listening a little bit more, to misquote Hamilton. What would it be like if instead of just transmitting your thoughts and hopes and dreams and failures to God, which we're going to do a lot of over the next few days, what would it be like if you just tried some active listening? You might not hear anything back in the ways that you expected, but you might find that something really transformative happens in that space if you allow it to exist. So maybe you take this time to use the words in your machzor and let them wash through you. Let that be the thing that clicks your brain off, that takes you out of transmission mode. Maybe you do sort of a standing up Shavasana pose. The word Amidah literally means to stand. So maybe what you do is you seat your feet on the floor, put your hips over your feet, put your shoulders over your hips, your chin right up over your shoulders, and you put your body in equilibrium, and you just stand there. Maybe you ask God a question, and maybe you won't get an answer right away, or maybe you will. Maybe the answer will surprise you. Maybe it will be just God saying, hey, what's up? Let's talk. Because while this is the beginning of a new year, it's also Shabbat, and it's also a season of transformation. Sure, we're supposed to transform ourselves, but what if we're actually also supposed to transform the way that we pray, the way that we relate to God? So take a little time to try to do a little less. See what happens.
V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit olam. Ay, 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 bini uvein b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz u'bayom hashvi Shabbat vayinafash. Tiku v'chodesh shofar. Tiku v'chodesh shofar. V'keseh leyom chageinu. Ki chol leYisrael hu mishpat leElohei Yaakov. Ay, le, ay, ay, ooh, ay, ay, So we're going to move now into our personal Amidah. So I want to invite you to take 3 steps backward and 3 steps forward. It's sort of the universal Jewish way of acknowledging that you want to sort of step out of the space that you're in and into a new space, while all the while staying in the same space. Not going very far, but sort of making a conscious shift from where we've been to where we're going. We're going into a space of no words, actually. Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Open my lips so that my mouth can be filled with whatever's on my heart. And so whatever the thing is that comes to you in this quiet space, so allow that to be the words that flow through you, through your mouth, and up and out to the one who we connect with, we believe is listening in this moment. So we take our 3 steps backward, 3 3 steps forwards. We'll begin with singing these words of opening, and then we'll have some quiet personal time. Na 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 Adonai. Na 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 Svatai Tiftach. Na 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 Ufi Agi. Ufi Agi Tehilatecha. Na 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 Adonai. Na 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 Svatai Tiftach. Na 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 Ufi Agi. Ufi Agi Tehilatecha. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah Adonai min hashamayim. Hallelujah b'meromim. Hallelujah kol melachav. Hallelujah kol tziva'av. Hallelujah shemesh ve'yareach. Hallelujah kol kochvei or. Hallelujah shemeach shamayim mehamayim. Asher me'al hashamayim. Hallelujah Shem Adonai. Ki hu tziva v'nira'u. Vayamidem le'ad le'olam. V'o natan ve'lo yavor. Hallelujah Shem Adonai. Ki hu tziva v'nira'u. Vayamidem le'ad le'olam. Hallelujah.
On the eve of the coronavirus pandemic, Mishkan hosted a big fat 300-person indoor Purim party. It makes me uncomfortable to think about now, and so grateful it didn't end up being a super spreader event. I'll just say that now. Nonetheless, on March 9th, we knew there was something called coronavirus. It's being caught and spread by people. You know, the CDC had recommendations about how to host events, and we followed all of them. We had hand sanitizer stations, we had signs reminding people to wash their hands for 20 seconds. All the food was individual self-serve. People weren't wearing masks, of course, because at that time we were told by science that masks didn't do anything to prevent the spread of the virus. People were still going to work, going to school, going to synagogue, going to concerts, using public transportation, going to restaurants and bars. So long as we were doing all the right things, what could go wrong? We themed that event, ironically, When Pigs Fly, Purim 2020, a title we thought was cute because we were a bunch of mostly vegetarian Jews throwing this big party at a charcuterie place, the pork kind. But now I look back at us in March with a sense of loving compassion about how little we knew of how our lives were going to change. When Pigs Fly could be the theme song of this year. Or to quote the Megillah, V'nahafochu, and everything just turned upside down without warning. Yom Kippur, not Purim, Yom Kippur, is considered the mirror image of Purim. Purim in March, Yom Kippur in mid-September. And you can hear it in the names of the holidays. Purim, Yom Kippurim, a day like Purim. The thesis statement of these holidays is basically the same. Life is inescapably unpredictable. And so we would do well to consider how we spend the precious time we have here while we have it. As Purim approaches, the existential truth with feasting and drinking and costumes and reading this salacious tale of a little Jewish girl who sleeps her way into power and then saves us all, Yom Kippur goes the opposite direction, right? We remove all of these indulgences, food, drink, sex, nice clothes, even a good narrative, as you'll see when we read Torah next week. But the emotional and spiritual thrust of the holidays is the same. And they're 7 months apart on opposite sides of the calendar, as if to say to us, you must never get too far away in your awareness from this truth, which is that life is utterly and inescapably unpredictable, can change on a dime. V'nahafochu, everything gets thrown into the air and lands upside down. This thing called life is real, and we are often completely unprepared. And so Rabbi Eliezer says to his disciples in the Talmud, make tshuva. Change your life. If you're going to do it one day before you die. And his disciples say to him, but Master, nobody knows when they're going to die. And he says, all the more reason to make tshuva, to change now. And so we gather tonight, Erev Rosh Hashanah, and throughout this holiday season for what amounts to a shortening of the journey between birth and death, a kfitzat haderech, from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, and then of course back to life again as we extinguish the candle at the end of Yom Kippur and head into the rest of the fall holidays. And we examine how we are spending our precious time and money and love and attention, knowing that everything could change without warning. On Rosh Hashanah, we say, Hayom Harat Olam. Today, the world is being conceived, is being born, which I know feels a little out of sync with how it feels to be quarantining right now. But nonetheless, this is the holiday of infinite possibility. And Yom Kippur is the holiday of remembering that we will not be here forever. To put it bluntly, we will die. And Yom Kippur, we abstain from all of these lovely things that remind us how good it feels to be alive, food, sex, drink, business, right? Gossip, perfumes and lotions, things that make us feel beautiful and presentable. And we clear it aside for a day and live in the space of profound emptiness. And in that empty space, we can focus more clearly and more completely on life's big questions. Who are we if we are not the sum total of all of those, yes, pleasurable, but ultimately fleeting distractions? Ma'anu, ma chayenu. What is our life really about? These are the questions not just of the high holiday season, but a person lying on their deathbed confronts these questions. And these are the questions that so many of us have been asking during this pandemic as our lives have become more circumscribed and so many of the things that we have looked forward to have been taken off the table, off the calendar, sometimes temporarily and possibly indefinitely. And we feel like we're just stalled, treading water, not even knowing how to move forward. Many people are wondering, if I'm not my job, if I'm not my career aspirations, my degree, then who am I? And if I'm feeling depressed and anxious and lonely and isolated during these times, how can I meaningfully contribute to the world? And these questions aren't just, sort of emotional indulgences of the high holiday season. These questions are matters of life and death. You may know that the suicide rate in Cook County is up over what it was last year. In the Black community, we have already exceeded the number of suicides in August of this year over the entire year from 2019. These questions are matters of life and death. And so Jewish tradition insists that we get together at least once a year for this conversation to find renewed meaning and purpose in our lives, despite and even because the world is so precarious all around us. Every other high holiday season has been a rehearsal for this year. And so, I thought I might offer a framework for making meaning in this time that does not rely on advanced degrees or professional advancement or even leaving your house. The questions I'm going to share with you focus on character and how we spend our time, because while so much is beyond our grasp to control or to predict, these things are eminently within our control. So Rava, a great sage in the Babylonian Talmud, describes 6 questions that a person is asked on their judgment day. Judgment day, by the way, is called Yom Hadin, which is another name for Rosh Hashanah. So rather than believing, there's one judgment day at the end of your life, we just have regular check-ins, regular judgment days, every single Rosh Hashanah, and we can ask ourselves these kinds of questions. So here we go. A person is brought in for judgment, and they say to him, Amar Rava b'sha'a shemichnasin adam ladin, omrim lo, nasata v'natata v'emunah, kavata itim l'torah, asakta b'priya u'reviyah, tzapita liyeshua, pilpalta b'chochma, hivanta davar mitoch davar. Did you engage in business with integrity? Did you set fixed times for study of Torah? Did you occupy yourself with your legacy, with what comes after you? Did you hope for salvation? Was your wisdom grounded in details, which you discussed with people who understood those finer points differently from you? Did you learn one thing from another? So take a second and look at that list. What do you notice about it? What do you notice about the questions on this list? More importantly, if your judgment day were tomorrow, how do you think you'd fare? All right, so if we were in person, we'd do a whole back and forth here. I'd, ask questions of the people I could see in the first couple of rows, and we'd talk about this. As it is, I'll share with you what I like about this list. What I like about it is it riffs off a familiar notion in Jewish tradition, lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It is not up to you to finish the task. Ve'lo ata ben chorin lehibatel mimena. But you're also not free to desist. None of these questions relies on finishing whatever lofty goal you might have set out, whether personal, for your family, or for the world. These questions are about effort, which you can control, day to day, week to week, year to year, as long as we have time. So I want to look at just a few of these questions, knowing that lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, we're not going to do everything. And so, maybe we'll do the ones we don't do this year, next year. Nasata v'natata be'emunah. Did you give and take with integrity? So Hebrew speakers will see that this question literally is about business, honesty in business. Masa umatan is Hebrew for business. But beneath the surface, this question gets at the heart of who we are, the business of our lives. This question is an invitation to consider how you give and how you take your time, your money, your intention. How do you give and take in friendship, in partnering, in romance? As a person seeing another person on the street who needs help, who sits right outside the Starbucks that you go into 3 times a week to buy coffee and a sandwich, what do you take? How are you giving? We develop these narratives about our time and our money. Usually they're of the I don't have enough variety. Now is a great time to re-examine these stories of how much we have and therefore how much we have to give. It turns out that one of the biggest indicators of happiness is how much we empathize with other people, how much our hearts are connected to the experiences and the suffering of other people, and how able we are to give toward other people's well-being. In the neighborhood mutual aid societies that cropped up as the pandemic got underway, it became clear money wasn't the only valuable commodity. One person would give their stimulus check to another who needed to pay rent on the spreadsheet, and that person in turn might go grocery shopping for a person who couldn't leave their house, or cat sit for a person who was out of town, or volunteer at a food bank. Deploying the scarce resource that so many of us chase after no matter how much money we have, and that's time. Did you give and take with faith? Has no end point, meaning you can make tshuva at any time. It's just a recalibrating, a constant recalibrating of energy out and energy in. We can make tshuva by just adjusting the dial, which of course is easier said than done. But as we say every single week on Shabbat, when we get the chance to stop and recalibrate, sof ma'aseh b'machshavat tchila, the end result is born with setting the intention. So you might think over this holiday about what you want to let go of. This would be a good tashlich activity as you cast away stones or bread. What might you give away? What might you let go of in order to create space for what needs to come in? Kavata itim l'Torah. Did you set aside fixed times for the study of Torah? Never before in human history has there been so much wisdom and moral guidance of every stripe and shade and religion and philosophy available so freely with the click of a button, swipe of a finger. And yet, I'll just speak personally, I often feel that at the end of a week of what amounts to a diet of internet snacking, of little bits of wisdom, I don't actually feel intellectually or spiritually nourished. I don't feel like more of the person I want to be. Kavata itim l'Torah is an invitation to fix times in our week for the kind of learning that doesn't give us the dopamine hit of finishing a video or an article and checking it off the list or closing the tab. Rather, it's a practice of committing to an ongoing relationship with a meaningful subject whose benefit is cumulative over time, right? It's learning you could do and do and do and never be finished. This is why Jews are called people of the book. It's like a Torah scroll. We read it to the end, scroll it back, start from the beginning, because we believe there's just always more to learn. Kavata itim l'Torah, a fixed time, the way you affix a mezuzah on the side of your door, it's the same word, so that you see it when you come and go, because it reminds you of who you want to be in the world. So I want to ask, what is a subject area that matters deeply to who you are Maybe you spent time in college studying it, or maybe when you were younger you explored it and it's been a while. But you want to get back there. You want to get back to that place of having a regular practice, whether it's every day or every week, where you get to dig into this thing. Maybe it's with another person, maybe it's with a group. Even if it's a page a week, maybe it's a sentence a week. So I want to give a personal and specific and current example of what this can look like. Maybe a recommendation for this year. Many of us took to the streets in protest after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were murdered by police this past May. Many of you expressed deeply felt sentiments that you want to be part of dismantling white supremacy now that its effects are so visible and so painful, which they have been as long as this country has existed. But now it seems that it is much more palpable and people are ready to get in the streets and do something. I should say, white people are ready to get in the streets and do something. And you came to me and you said, I want to do this, but I don't even know where to start. Right? Conversations about whether to reform or defund or abolish police departments felt a step beyond, or maybe a few steps beyond, the foundational questions of what it means to be white and Jewish, if that describes you. It describes me. It describes 85% of the American Jewish community. And we never talk about it. We never talk about it. We never study it. Kavata itim l'Torah, right? This seems like it should be something that we are conscious of. In my synagogue youth group, we talked about the overlapping and sometimes conflicting identities of being American and Jewish, right? Being American, we have this calendar. Being Jewish, we have this calendar. We have different foundational values in places. We never talked about race, which is one indication of being white in America. So when I say we, I'm talking about a predominantly white and Ashkenazi Jewish community. We never talked about race. And if you don't need to talk about the implications of your race in this country, chances are you're white living in a country that privileges whiteness. No one ever had to sit down with me and tell me how to hold my hands should a police car pull me over for speeding on Lakeshore Drive or running a stop sign, which happened a couple times in high school because I was a very creative driver. I never once feared for my life or my safety at one of those traffic stops at 1 a.m. in Hyde Park. Even as the stories I carry, the story of my family, the stories that brought my family to America are in fact ones of state-sanctioned violence and oppression. As far as I was always concerned, my race was Jewish because that's what was stamped in my grandparents' passports from Germany and Poland and Russia. But in America, race is overwhelmingly skin color. And mine is white. And I have benefited from a few generations of being perceived that way in this country. In terms of my family's access to housing, where they could buy a house, mortgage lending, the rates they got and the mortgage terms, education, jobs, healthcare. This is true for the majority of American Jews. 85% are white, and we don't talk about it, and we don't talk about the disparities in opportunities and in the feelings inside of our community across racial lines. In the 60s, some synagogues and Jewish communities encouraged the Jewish community to stand and sit in with and march alongside and fight with the Black community for equal rights for African Americans. And I say some because it was not all. And we might romanticize that time, but it was not all Jewish communities. That was over 50 years ago. What might it look like for mainstream Jewish communities now to devote time and resources, real time and real resources, right now, unequivocally, to stand with the Black community? People within our community, people beyond our community, our family, our friends, our neighbors, to say Black Lives Matter and to make sure that the privileges of being American are truly available to all people regardless of skin color. Kavata itim l'Torah. We must set aside time and resources to do this? Are we prepared to unlearn things that we thought we knew about ourselves, about our community, about race relations, and open ourselves up to be vulnerable and admit the places where we have to grow? That's Torah. That's Torah. Kavata itim l'Torah. Think about struggling with, reckoning with the hard-fought stuff that defines who we are. So I want to suggest that race and Judaism is an issue that deserves real and sustained time and resources, if not every day, like the 30-day Elul Confessions of the Heart Challenge that we've been doing with the Jewish Emergent Network, if not every day, maybe every week. To learn more about these questions and the implications of race in the Jewish community and beyond right now. And I will say this especially applies if you are in the 85% of people who haven't maybe really thought about how white and how Ashkenormative our spaces are and the effect that that has on people and Jews of color, the assumptions we make about what is Jewish, recognizing now that actually those might just be our assumptions based on our experience, or my assumption based on my experience. So I plan to talk about this a little bit more on Yom Kippur. Mishkan has, in the meantime, collectively made a commitment to exploring these questions in a sustained and committed way, whether it's been the anti-racist book groups or whether it's working with Edot HaMizrach, an organization that's going to help us think about how to do more with promoting and cultivating true diversity, the true diversity of the Jewish community, and supporting a flourishing Jewish community in which all of our lives and experiences and backgrounds really are valued. This is not something that one can just check off with a lecture or a podcast. This is a decision to change our lives, to include more learning. And what that does in a community that takes this on is it adds up to a more conscious, more empowered, more informed, ultimately more just community. That's the kind of community we're trying to create here. Okay, now that I've spent like 20 minutes on the first two questions, I'm going to move in the direction of closing with this caveat in mind that we're never really done when we start to unpack and reflect on our lives and what we might do with our precious time in this coming year. Okay, I want to expand our vision outward, and for a moment, think of our individual tshuva, our individual growth journeys, as not just having implications for our own lives, but as being part of a larger Jewish project, and that project is saving the planet. Saving the planet. Yes, the religious word for this is salvation. Not a word that progressive Jews sit around the Shabbat table and bandy around, but tzapita liyeshua, it's one of the questions. Did you hope for salvation? Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who is a modern Orthodox luminary, writes in his book, The Jewish Way, the central paradigm of Jewish religion is redemption. Life will triumph over its enemies: war, oppression, hunger, poverty, sickness, even death. And in a world of justice and peace, with all material needs taken care of, human beings will be free to establish a harmonious relationship with nature, with each other, and with God. This is not the first high holiday season that our people has entered while it felt like the world was on fire. And in other years, I have found it comforting to remind myself, what we're going through is rough, but our ancestors had it harder. I think anyone paying attention right now knows that this is a moment to take seriously, right? Whether we're talking about climate change, these are, just some of the issues that come to mind for me. The fact that in a decade, at my son's bar mitzvah, we will be at an inflection point for climate change that will determine the future of survival, human survival on planet Earth. And we're not moving in the right direction, right? Our imperiled democracy, systemic racism in America, rising anti-Semitism, an untenable situation in Israel with a Jewish government effectively ruling over two peoples unequally. This is a moment where I believe our ancestors are calling to us from the grave to wake up, wake up. We can't be complacent. We can't roll over and throw the blanket over our head. We should be uncomfortable. But in the words of one of my teachers, Ezra Furman, native Chicagoan indie rocker, despair is not a strategy. Tzapita liyeshua, did you hope for salvation? Did you hold this vision of the world, the one that Rabbi Greenberg describes, at the forefront of your mind? The Garden of Eden. Humanity, nature, and God coexisting harmoniously. Did you hold it in the forefront of your mind with the cognitive dissonance as you look with the very same eyes at the world as it is? Rabbi Greenberg calls this Jewish sense of the messianic perfected world that we have to hold constantly the dream. And by holding on to it year after year, making this the reason why we do whatever we do, we survive. We survive as we work decade by decade, century by century toward more equality and more justice, more human dignity, and more peace. And lest you think that these are just some lefty buzzwords from your progressive rabbi over here, these ideas are taken from the traditional Amidah that Jews have been saying 3 times a day for 2,000 years. Every day saying prayers to restore justice and wise judges, to bring us wisdom, to bring us healing, to bring an end to all corruption and power hoarding and evil rulership and lie telling on the part of our government. Prayers for freedom and dignity. And finally, the Amidah ends with a blessing for peace, as all the most important Jewish prayers do. Holding impossible dreams is what has kept our people alive for over 2,000 years, 3,000, 4,000, in Israel and in the diaspora. And I think this relentless sense of the impossible dream is where the Jewish flair for activism comes from. We have for so long been the ones victimized by the societies in which we have lived. V'nahafochu, and things have turned upside down. Since the end of World War II and the birth of the State of Israel, the Jewish people have never been stronger, had a more public voice or military power or political influence. What are we doing with that power and influence to bring about salvation? And I know this is a question. Maybe it's phrased as tikkun olam or social justice. This is a question that we concern ourselves with. What I like about this question, tzapita liyeshua, is that even in a moment where there is an uptick in anti-Semitism, which we should be concerned about and we should talk about, we don't isolate our salvation as being somehow distinct and separate from the salvation of all people. This is not a particularistic kind of salvation. Our salvation is bound up with the saving of all people, especially of all oppressed and marginalized people. Think of the 36 times in the Torah that we are reminded we were oppressed in the land of Egypt. We were strangers, and to love the stranger, right? We are also bound up with the fate of our planet. And so Rosh Hashanah, getting back to this moment, Rosh Hashanah as Judgment Day, as you'll see from the liturgy tomorrow, it's not just about us, our life, our people's life. The whole world, the text describes, is brought before the Holy One and stands before God to a person, to an animal, like a sheep before a loving shepherd, being assessed. And this is not an abstract concept, like a sort of poetic metaphor. This is a series of questions for us about what we're doing with our resources, what we're doing with our time and our money and our love and our attention. How we learn, how we grow, especially by encountering difference in the world and ideologically and politically, right? How we engage in machloket l'shem shamayim, how we bring our experience into dialogue with the experience of others who see the world very differently, and somehow actually perfect the world through encounter with other kinds of people and ideas. There is so much that has been hard about the last year, and particularly the last 7 months. This kfitzat haderech, this shortening of the way between birth and death, places in front of us at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur the book of life and the book of death. And the text says, we write our own fate with our own hand, our own keystrokes. So don't should all over yourself about the things you haven't done yet. That's not helpful. The book is open. We can start now. Right? To quote Anne Frank, how wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment to begin to improve ourselves. So for us, for our children, for 7 generations children from now, for our people, for all people, for our planet, let's hold this dream as a sacred aspiration, knowing that it may not be fulfilled in our lifetime. But we, like those who came before us, will work at it day by day, week by week, year by year, decade by decade toward its fulfillment. We don't have any other choice. Despair is not a strategy. L'shana tova.
Every day since March, at 8 in the morning, a group of Mishkanites log in from around the country to sing, breathe, and connect. And at 8:29, 1 minute before the minyan ends, I invite anyone who's remembering a loved one or a person they've lost in their life to share that name in the chat box. And I invite everyone else to unmute themselves so that we can hear a chorus of amens. After months together, we all know who each person is remembering. Yet every day we share their names again. We say amen together again. The community building that happens around Mourner's Kaddish is so beautiful. So every day I feel a little bit awkward. When we end the Kaddish, take a breath, and then head out into our separate days. After an uplifting experience of communal prayer, as we stand ready to leave the cocoon and re-enter our lives, we're handed a moment of emotional vulnerability, asked to publicly recall pain and loss. The moment we most need our community is the moment we bring it to an end, at least tangibly. As we move into Mourner's Kaddish this evening, my heart goes out to everyone who is on a grief journey. Every year we come to the high holidays and we have to confront those who weren't with us for a pre-holiday meal or FaceTime call. This year we might have even more mourners in our midst as we remember the hundreds of thousands of dead in the pandemic. 2020 has been a traumatic year of loss for so many. But perhaps this placement in the service, Mourner's Kaddish at the very end, is actually what we need. a reminder that though we will go our separate ways, beneath all the chaos we experience are forces we can't see, a divinity that holds us with compassion, that safeguards justice, and a community who shares our pain and cares for us. So if you are in mourning or observing a yortzeit or remembering someone that you have lost, I'll invite you to share now their name in the chat box so that we can all be part of their remembering. To rise if you're able as we say the mourner's Kaddish.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba.
Amen.
V'yalma divrei chirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayachon uvyomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael v'agala uvizman kariv v'imru.
Amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabba V'varach Elam Lo Me'amaya.
Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shmei
Sha'richu.
Le'ela Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata v'miran v'alma v'imru.
Amen.
Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'imromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru.
Amen. Amen.
Yehi zichronam livracha. May all of their memories be blessings. I know that for many of us, the past 6 months have felt a little bit like Groundhog Day, just living the same reality within the confines of our home and the local surroundings day after day. In this limited reality, I'm pleased to report that I have honed my ability to make a mocha better than Starbucks at home. I've also spoken to my parents far more frequently than I was ever speaking to them before. For many people, this year has forced us to consider what in our lives feels most foundational, what values really drive us, and has invited us to double down on the stuff that really matters and leave the rest behind. You might enjoy the ritual, the Rosh Hashanah ritual of tashlich, tossing off the sins and the gunk from last year in the form of chunks of bread or pebbles into water, maybe tomorrow, maybe sometime later in the week, as a way of embodying that sort of sloughing off of the past and entering the new year with new resolve to new habits and new commitments. I also know that being in the privacy of our own homes can sort of undermine those commitments and force us to confront our own inertia because there's zero accountability if nobody is watching. I'm concerned that the second you close your computer screen, you might forget that it's Rosh Hashanah and just go about the night as you would any other night of the year. So, before we close, I just want to remind you that tonight's a really special night. Today is not a normal day. It's the beginning of something completely new. Hayom Harat Olam. The tradition says, today a new world is being conceived, gestated. A new world, yes, out there is being conceived, is being gestated. And maybe, in the words of the Counting Crows, maybe this year will be better than the last. And in here, inside of each one of us, there is potential. Think really carefully about how you want to spend this night, the rest of your night tonight, as the beginning of the rest of your one wild and precious life, to quote the poet Mary Oliver. What do you need to feel held and supported? Do you want to call a friend? Do you want to call a parent? Go to bed.
Livelihood, may we be remembered and sealed by you, we, all of your people, the house of Israel, and all people for a good life and for peace. Sefer Chaim, Racha v'Shalom, Ufarnasa, Tov.